Your next reading is corporate governance. And these are the specific learning outcome statements. We will briefly discuss all of these and then go straight to the questions. So your first LOS is describe corporate governance. What is corporate governance and why do we have to study corporate governance in CFA? First of all, the word governance, normally governance, risk management, it's a part of every professional certification, be it CIA, CMA, ACCA, even CPA. And of course, your role as analysts, it also involves some analysis and understanding of governance. So governance, the word governance has been driven from a Latin term, gobernare. It's a Latin word, gobernare, and its literal translation means to steer, direct. So when we use the word corporate governance, it means directing an organization in a specific direction, in a specific disha, where you want to take your business to. So corporate governance is directing the business to a specific objective, to a specific goal. All right. That's the meaning normally used, literal translation of the word governance. Now governance, some elements of governance include introduction. We will also have an overview of corporate governance. First of all, a proper definition of corporate governance means it's a system of internal controls, procedures, standard operating procedures, directives, so that a business can be directed towards its chosen objectives. Whatever the objectives might have been set by the board of directors. So taking the organization in that specific direction. For that we need to draft and design some controls, some procedures, some directives. Not only that, it also provides a framework, a structure that determines who is responsible for what, who is answerable to whom, who has what specific duties. So it's a complete system. It's not just directing the business in a specific direction. It's a complete system of delegating duties, responsibilities, who is reportable to whom, who is answerable to whom. This complete system is called corporate governance. It's a loosely mandated system because there is no universal application of corporate governance. It varies from country to country, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Even within the same countries, we have different corporate governance systems. So there is no universal set of corporate governance structures and frameworks. That you have to be very clear on that. All right. Then within corporate governance, and why do we have to, as management, as analysts, why do we need to be concerned with corporate governance? We as analysts, we need to see the corporate governance structure of any organization because we are going to invest or we are going to recommend an investment in a particular organization. Investors have become now more attentive to corporate governance frameworks. It's an essential part of your analysis before making an investment decision. Specifically ESG. Environmental, social and governance related issues are now important. So corporate governance can be viewed from two aspects. First, shareholder view. This is a very narrow approach. Under the shareholder theory, our focus is only to meet the responsibility of or duties towards the stockholders or the shareholders. Only to serve and protect the interest of the stockholders. Of course, a very narrow approach called shareholder theory. Since an organization is a part of social fabric, it is operating in a social structure, it has certain responsibilities and duties not just to shareholders but to those who are connected, even to the society at large. It's a very narrow approach. An organization exists to serve the shareholders, a very narrow approach. A broader approach is called the stakeholder theory. Stakeholder means those individuals, companies, organizations that are directly affected by what an organization does. It's a broader view. It includes not only shareholders, it includes the connected parties like your employees, your suppliers, your customers, your fund providers, and society at large. So this is an old approach now. An organization is considered as a part of a social structure. It is responsible to other stakeholders, not just to shareholders alone. Right? So extending this idea further, Your next LOS says, describe a company's stakeholders groups and compare interest of stakeholder groups. Company stakeholders, as we said, are those individuals, entities, organizations who have some interest in an organization and they affect the organization and they get affected by the actions of the organization. Shareholders, primarily, these are the owners who have invested their money in the company. They get affected by what a company does. Their interest relates to dividends and share price appreciation. Creditors, those who have provided funds to the organization, their interest is to receive the interest on provided funds and the principal payment on time. Managers, employees, they work in the organization, they have their job at stake, their future prospects, their career progression. Every stakeholder has some interest. So managers and employees, they have their interests related to their careers. Board of directors, people entrusted with the obligation to run the business on their behalf. Agents of the shareholders. Shareholders elect directors to the board of directors, and these board of directors together with the management are responsible for taking the business in a specific direction. Remember, governance has two components. We just don't need to go to that depth normally which we do in CMA, but it's essential. It not only involves direction, it also requires oversight. Strategic direction to which the business is to be taken, and oversight whether the business is being taken in that specific direction that was originally intended. So direction and oversight, they both go side by side. That's the role of the board of directors. As agents of the shareholders, they are responsible to act in the best interest of the shareholders. Customers, those who buy goods and services from our organization, and what is their interest? To receive quality product and services at affordable price. Suppliers, those who provide goods and services on credit, and what they expect? They expect payment on time. They want to be paid on time. They don't want delayed payments. Government and regulators. Since in corporate world, in listed organization, there is a divorce between the ownership and control. Someone else owns the company, but someone else controls it. Because stockholders are so many in number, they cannot run the business themselves. They are sometimes could be in millions. So they select certain individuals called directors to the board of directors, and they in turn run the business on their behalf through management. Since there is divorce between ownership and control, and there is a risk that owners might stand to lose their investment if there is no check on those people who manage their investments. For this, government has established frontline regulators like stock exchanges, as well as regulators like SEC, SECP, Board of Exchange and Security in India, Financial Conduct Authority in England. So these are the regulators who reduce this separation between ownership and control. They regulate these organizations so that the shareholders, the investors, are not defrauded. So these are the stakeholders and these are the interests they have in the organization, which we have discussed. Moving on to your next LOS. Describe the principal, agent and other relationships in corporate governance and the conflicts that may arise in these relationships. We just discussed that what is principal and agent. Let's say I am seller of a certain commodity X and I have appointed a certain individual, Mr. Z, in country L, who will sell these goods on my behalf. So basically I have appointed Z as my agent who will sell these goods on my behalf. I am the principal and Z is the agent, and this relationship between me and him is a relationship of agency. Z will sell goods on my behalf and in return he will get some commission. Technically, this is the same arrangement exists between the shareholders and the directors and management. Shareholders appoint the directors who in turn appoint the corporate officers. These are the agents of the shareholders and they act in the best interest of the shareholders. So principal, agent and other relationship in corporate governance, as I said, So nature of the relationship explained. Let us see these stakeholders conflict. What could be the conflict between different stakeholders? See, there's a range of stakeholders and all with differing interest. Shareholders want return on their investment. They are willing to take risks. Creditors are not willing to take risk. Why? Because they want regular payment of interest and principal. So they are not likely to take risk. Managers and employees, they are more concerned with their maintenance of jobs and their career prospects. Right? Customers, their orientation is towards good quality product or service at affordable cost. Suppliers want to be get paid in time. So every stakeholder has his or her own axe to grind, his or her own specific interest from the organization. How to manage these different stakeholders with conflicting demands from the organization, that's the purview of corporate governance. Shareholders and directors. As I said, shareholders are willing to take on risks because they have also already diversified their investment into A, B, C, D, E. So they are willing to take on risks. But director on the other side, they have less risk tolerance. They won't jump into some decisions that could put the business in trouble. So this is the risk between the shareholders and directors. Shareholders are willing to take on risk to maximize their reward, whereas the directors are little risk tolerant, risk averse. That's the difference. That's the conflict. Controlling interest and non-controlling interest. A certain organization where 70% shares are held by X and 30% shares are held by another group of investors, A, B, C, D. So the group that holds 70% or an entity that holds 70% interest, this interest is called controlling interest. This 30% is non-controlling interest. Previously, it was called minority interest. Since 70% is a sizable holding, such a holding will dominate, influence the decision making. So whatever this 70% holding says, that will happen. Maybe non-controlling interest wants to move in this direction because they have lesser holdings, so they might not be heard. That group holds 70% will hold sway. They overshadow the decision-making process and eventually will take on to the direction where the controlling interest. So that's the conflict. Managers and board. Yes, there can be a conflict between these. Since board of directors, they are not themselves involved in the day-to-day operations. It's the managers who are involved in operations, in running the business. The conflict could be that managers might provide information that may have limited utility, that may restrict the board's capability to make decisions. They might provide fraudulent information, maybe misrepresented information or anything like that. So that could be a conflict. Managers may involve or indulge in such type of activities. Then shareholders versus creditors. Apparently, shareholders are willing to take on more risk because they know they are the one who will receive the residual profit. Interest paid, preferred stock paid, preferred stock dividend, whatever remains goes in the pockets of shareholders. So they are willing to take on more risk so that the reward could be increased, and this reward eventually goes into their pockets. Preferred stock dividend is normally fixed. Interest to the bondholders and bankers is fixed. The sizable part of the earning, whatever remains, goes in the pockets of shareholders. So they are willing to take on more risk, but creditors on the other hand will not like to take excessive risk because this could put their investments in danger. So that's again a conflict between shareholders and creditors. And lastly, other stakeholders like customers, suppliers, shareholders, they might have regulators, they might have their own interest that might conflict with the interest of the other stakeholders. Next, LOS is describe stakeholders management. Overview of stakeholder management or shareholders management. Stakeholder would be the more appropriate one because it's more broader in term. Effective communication is essential between the board and the shareholders. This is done through regular interactions, regular investors meeting between the management and the investors, especially the institutional investors who hold sizable investments and they are themselves certain investment organizations. So effective communication is essential so that any concerns the investors may have, those concerns may be sorted out. Because there is information asymmetry. Management knows everything. investors may not know everything. So this information asymmetry can be reduced by effective communication, where both parties can convey their concerns and they can freely exchange ideas and whatever they want to know. Active management means that shareholders are actively involved in influencing the decisions of management. We'll discuss this in later slides. So there are basically three types of infrastructure that define the relationship between the board and the shareholder. First is the legal infrastructure. Every organization in the corporate world is formed under some laws, corporate laws everywhere, India, Pakistan, or United States. Certain, like in the US Security Exchange Act of 1934, companies are registered under this law. So laws, legal recourse, what are the respective duties of directors, and what are the rights of the shareholders, it is enshrined in the pieces of legislature, and such an infrastructure, such an arrangement is called the legal infrastructure. Then contractual. Other than law, you may have a separate contract between your supplier. Your company may have a written credit agreement with your supplier. You may have an agreement with the investors who have invested in your bonds. So such an arrangement is called the contractual infrastructure. Contractual arrangements under the contract to secure the rights of various stakeholders, investors, suppliers, customers, creditors. When I say supplier, suppliers of goods and services. When I say creditors, means those who have provided funds to the company. And then finally, governmental regulations. How is it different than legal infrastructure? Governmental infrastructure involves certain regulations. These regulations are subordinate to the law. Like a certain country has Environmental Protection Act, for example, 1940. This is the piece of law. Under the law, they might draft certain set of regulations to be complied with by the companies. So, governmental infrastructure involves regulations imposed on the companies, and those regulations have been drawn up under certain law, under some statute. Mechanism of shareholder management. There are regular meetings, annual general meetings, or in order to discuss some extraordinary matter, there might be extraordinary general meetings. Board of directors could be 1 tier, 2 tier, we'll discuss. Audit function, audit committees, external audit by CPA firms, chartered accountants, all this is a part of shareholder management. Reporting and transparency under the IFRS or local laws. Remuneration policies, who should get what. Contractual agreements with the creditors, with the bankers, with the fund providers, investors of your bonds. And contractual agreements with the customers and suppliers. That means the credit agreements. Whenever you want to buy goods on credit from company X or Y, there is a formal contract that has to be signed between the supplier and the customer that will define the respective responsibilities, the credit limit assigned, in case of default in payment, the legal ramifications. So contractual agreements with the customers and suppliers. This is how the relationships are defined between the parties. Employees, laws, regulations, that is employment laws, contract, job contracts, they are all documents that define the relationship of various stakeholders with the organization, all of these. Next, two LOSs have been combined. Describe the mechanism to manage stakeholders' relationship and mitigate associated risk. First. And second, describe functions and responsibilities of company's board of directors and its committees. First of all, the composition of board could be 1 tier or 2 tier. In 1 tier board, the board is split into 2 parts, independent directors and executive directors. Independent directors, they do not have any operational role. They are also sometimes called the non-executive directors. They do not have any operational role. They are just there to keep their watchful eyes on the management. They are part of certain committees, audit committees, independent directors. All members of the audit committees are independent directors or non-executive directors who have no operational role. Most of the members of the remuneration committee that decides who should get what, who should be paid what, most of the directors or most of the members in the remuneration or compensation committees are the non-executive directors. So these are a specific set of directors, group of individuals who have no financial interest in the company, and they are not employees of the company. They get paid for attending meetings. They are not compensated by the company. Whereas the executive directors, individuals responsible for certain supervisory or management related role in the organization. This is the one-tier board where the board is split into executive and non-executive directors. The two-tier board consists of the supervisory board and the management board. Structure is similar. The supervisory board is responsible to oversee the management board. Management board is headed by the CEO, and supervisory board just keeps an eye on the management board, just like the non-executive directors keep an eye on the functioning of the executive directors. Right. Then, functions and responsibilities of board of directors. Board of directors, they have the duty of care. And when you say care, means reasonable care. You cannot expect directors to be the man of infallibility. They make mistake. Everyone makes mistake. But they must exercise reasonable care. Let's say if certain decision has been taken and it has resulted in a sizable loss, $100 million, and a case has been filed against the director. If it is proven in the court of law that the director acted in good faith, he exercised reasonable care as expected of any individual, he's fine. But deliberate cheating, concealing, defrauding with intention for making personal gains, this could be cognizable, this could be a serious offense. Duty of loyalty. Directors have a special relationship with shareholders called fiduciary relationship. Fiduciary relationship is the relationship of mutual trust and confidence. This relationship exists between teacher and student. This relationship exists between the doctors and the patient, the lawyer and his client. Same relationship exists between the director and the shareholder. A relationship of trust and confidence, because shareholders have appointed directors with the hope that the shareholders' interest would be protected by the directors. So directors, in the other hand, they will have to prove their duty of loyalty by taking decisions that are in the best interest of the shareholders. Then there are different committees formed out of board of directors. Functions and responsibilities of board of directors involves various types of committees. Audit committee, as the name suggests, this committee is responsible to oversee the audit function, both internal audit as well as external audit. This committee is responsible to hire the external auditors, CPA firms, ACCA, chartered accountants, who will conduct the financial audit. Audit committee is responsible to set the remuneration of auditors. And internal auditor, the head of internal audit, and the external audit firm who conduct the financial audit, they report to the audit committee. This is specifically required in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act 2002. Audit committee be formed, and at least one member of the audit committee must be financial expert, must know US GAAP, must know the financial accounting. Second committee is governance committee. As the name suggests, this committee role is to ensure company adopts good corporate governance practices. This committee reviews policies, procedures, and it monitors whether the company is following the laws and regulations. Otherwise, there could be legal ramifications. Remuneration and compensation committee. This committee is responsible to decide upon the remuneration matters. Who should be paid what? It handles the contracts and the performances of the various managers and directors. Nomination committee. As the name suggests, this committee is responsible to recommend suitable individuals to the board. It establishes board's nomination procedures and policies. Risk committee, as the name suggests, this committee will help the board of directors in devising risk policies, will determine the risk tolerance, risk responses, etc., and implementing in the enterprise risk management under the COSO model. Investment committee, this is what we as analysts are concerned with. This committee will review and approve various investment projects related acquisition of some new asset, expansion into new markets, disinvestments. So this committee is responsible for approval and review of the investment projects that are submitted by the management. So these are the specific committees with certain roles defined. Next, LOS says describe the market and non-market factors that can affect the stakeholders' relationship and corporate governance. First, market factors. Competition and takeover. As the name suggests, competition and takeover, when your company is listed, there is a risk that your listed stock might be taken over by a group of individuals, and as soon as they hit above 50% holding, the entire composition of the board of directors could be reshuffled. Complete reorganization of the board structure. So competition and takeover, there is risk. When company is listed, your stock is listed, there is a risk that a group of individuals might buying your stock, and the moment they hold more than 50%, of course there are legal protections. Like in Pakistan, if any company about to hit 10% holding of a listed stock, it has to announce publicly in the newspapers that our group has attained 10% and we want to increase our holding. So the people should know who is buying. So there's always a risk if your company is listed, the risk of takeover. There are certain terms that you need to understand. Proxy. Certain group of individuals, ABC, specific active stakeholders, they might gather support from stakeholders, shareholders X, Y, Z. They can get their proxies, their voting right, and cast not only their votes, ABC, but also the votes of X, Y, Z through proxies. And using these proxy votes in the general meetings, they can use these shareholdings to change the composition of board of directors. Through proxies, this can happen. Many organizations, the composition of directors has been changed because some unhappy shareholders, they have given their voting right through proxies to some XYZ, and those individuals use their voting rights to change the composition of board of directors. Then tender offer. Your company might receive an offer for buyout. Like my company, Certain, has 100 million market valuation. Currently the share is trading at $50, and I have received an offer as management. The board of directors received an offer, tender offer, to sell the entire stock of the company at $55 each. Such tender offer might be welcomed, or it might be resisted through some anti-takeover measures. There are many techniques. Staggered board, where the board of directors cannot be changed for a certain period of time. Poison pill, where the company might sell that particular asset which has made you an attractive target. For example, my research base is very valuable. I'm a pharmaceutical firm. My research and development base is very attractive. A hostile takeover is primarily intended to acquire this research and development. This is something that has made me a very attractive target. Get rid of it. Sell it off. That's poison pill. You just sold something that made you a very attractive target. So these you can study. There are different types of anti-takeover strategies. Then shareholders engagement means, this we discussed a little while earlier, that company should have an active relationship with the shareholders. There must be an active communication. Board of directors, management frequently meet with the institutional investors so that the concerns can be voiced and they can be heard of, rather than just both of these entities are operating in isolation. Shareholder activism, as the name suggests, the certain group of shareholders, they are so active that they strongly influence the decision making in the organization. Not those who hold 1% or 0.5%. I'm talking about the institutional investors. Institutional investors, those are investors that they are themselves listed companies, larger, who hold more than 10, 15, 20% holding. So such investors, not only they have the representation on the board, but they will also force the management to take decisions in their favor. Non-market factors. Your legal environment, as we discussed, the law of the land could be different from place A to place B. legal environment, different corporate laws vary from one place to another. Even within the country, like in the US, one state laws might be different from another one. Within the legal environment, they have discussed two types of laws, legal systems. One is the common law, other is the civil law. Common law is driven from courts' decisions, also called the case law. The settled case law becomes a source for the future decision of the courts. Past court decisions are referenced and they are used as a guidance for future decisions of the court. Civil law is a codified law. It's a written law, a written constitution. Like US doesn't have any written constitution. So civil law is a codified law. It is specifically, explicitly written. So common law versus civil law, why are we studying? We're not studying law. It affects us. Common law and civil law affects us. How? Civil law, since it is codified, creditors and suppliers, these two group of individuals are catered to well under the civil law, because creditors and suppliers' rights and obligations are codified under the contract. But the rights of the shareholders are subjective. It's not as clear-cut as the relationship of creditors and suppliers with the organization. So common law, the case law, it serves the shareholders best. Past courts' decisions, they serve the shareholders best because they have evolved over the time, refined, they have identified the rights, respective obligations of directors to our shareholders. So the common law serves best the shareholders, whereas the civil law, the codified law, it serves creditors and suppliers. It's more specific, codified. Next, the media. Media, social media, of course, we have many financial newspapers, many channels involved specifically for financial markets. So media has the ability to spread information quickly and shape the public opinion. Yes, it plays a part as well. These factors also are involved as a part of corporate governance. The corporate governance industry. Yes. So far we have been being told that the audit firms provide audit, tax services, management consultancy, information system development. But audit firms, Big Four, I said Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, these firms also provide corporate governance services. They help the management in devising the system of internal control. They help the management in devising a management structure. So this is also a changing dynamics of your corporate world, corporate governance industry, various outside firms providing assistance to the organization in refining the system of corporate governance. Your next LOS is identify potential risk of poor corporate governance and stakeholder management, and identify benefits from effective corporate governance and stakeholder management. Okay, corporate governance, stakeholders management, risk and benefits. Risk of poor governance. If the system of check and balance, system of direction, system of oversight is weak, what are the drawbacks? The drawbacks would be there will be legal issues, legal violations, some regulatory violations, reputational risk. You did not follow the law, corporate governance law, so there might be some legal action. Like I remember the company I had some interest in, that company acquired more than 43% shares in another listed company under the SEC regulations. 10% above holdings require intimation to the general public as well as SEC. X company acquired 43% of Y company, but no such notification was made in the newspapers, or no such notification or such information was given to the SEC. And there was a fine, a very massive fine. So not compliance with the corporate governance laws could result in legal, regulatory and reputational risk. Weak control system, the system of check and balance within the organization, it will be weak. A weaker internal control system can put business in a great trouble. Ineffective decision making. Poor risk and governance system will render decision making ineffective. Poor decision making would be done. And since the business is being run poorly, the governance systems are weak, there is a risk of default. Remember, internal control system can be understood by the word ERC. This is how we study in financial accounting and governance. ERC, everything really counts. A system of internal control that gives a reasonable assurance that your operations are efficient and effective. Your financial reporting is reliable, and you're complying with the laws and regulations. So a system that provides reasonable assurance that efficient and effective operations are in place, financial reporting is reliable, and compliance with the laws and regulations. If your internal control system is weak, so you can expect some legal actions by the regulators. So these are the risks of poor governance. Benefits of good governance, they are quite self-explanatory. Operational efficiency, as I said, ERC, efficient and effective operations, reliability of financial reporting, improved controls, better operating and financial performance, and low default risk because you have been complying with the laws, regulations, and contracts with your various connected parties. Next, describe factors relevant to the analysis of corporate governance and stakeholders management. Economic ownership versus control, consideration in corporate governance and stakeholders management. Economic ownership and control. As we said, there is a divorce between ownership and control. Those who hold shares, they are not in charge of the business. They have appointed some individuals who act in their behalf. So this is a dichotomy that is there. As we started from the first or second slide, this is divorce in ownership and control. Not only that, there might be different classes of share. Certain classes of share give you the control. The other type of class of shares gives you the voting right. So there might be a dichotomy of classes of shares. Some give you superior rights, others just give you the control but not involvement in the decision making. Board of Directors representation. If you hold sizable number of shares, 10% to 20%, it means that such a large holding would result in representation in the Board of Directors. Then, remuneration and company performance. Yes. Remuneration of the senior management must be tied with the company performance. If company is performing poorly, how can the remuneration be high? How can the compensation be justified in the poor financial performance? Investors in the company. The pattern of shareholding. Normally it is required under the law that the companies are required to include the pattern of shareholding within the financial statements. That 0 to 10% are held by how many and all this. So this pattern of shareholding will also give you some basic understanding how the composition of investors are made up. Presence of any activists can attract new investors. If an organization has certain group of investors, ABC, and they are very active, means they influence the management decision making. Such existence of activist shareholders will attract new investors because these active investors will influence the management decision making, and they might attract new investors because new investors will also jump on the bandwagon and they will make good return on their investment this way. Strengths of the shareholders' rights. In our organization, how powerful institutional investors are in getting their concerns redressed compared to the companies A, B, and C. As I said, institutional investors are the most powerful group of shareholders for any organization because they hold sizable percentages of shares and their voices matter. Managing long-term risks. This is assessing management's ability how it will tackle long-term environmental risks. Transparency in financial reporting, treatment of various types of stakeholders, customers, suppliers, vendors, etc. And finally, the summary analysis for consideration. This is for specific interest of analysts. Analyzing corporate governance, the framework of corporate governance, other financial and non-financial considerations, they are very essential for the purpose of making a final decision by the analyst whether should we recommend this organization for investment purposes or not. Then two LOSs have been combined. Describe environmental and social considerations in investment analysis and describe how environmental, social, and governance factors may be useful or used in investment analysis. ESG considerations, when you say ESG, it's an acronym of environmental, social and governance related. These considerations are getting prominence because you just don't want to make reward out of your investment earnings, returns in the form of dividend or capital appreciation. Being a responsible investor, the company you have invested in, A Incorporated for example, is this organization socially responsible? Is it not destroying the environment? So environmental and social concerns were not viewed aggressively about 10 to 20 years ago, but now ESG has gained quite a lot of prominence. Green technology, conservation, efficient use of resources, sustainable development, all these concerns have necessitated that the analyst must take ESG considerations. So let us discuss these one by one. ESG market view. As I said, investors are, of course, they are interested in making money on their investment, return their investment, but they're also becoming more concerned with the human rights, with the environmental issues. Environmental degradation over the last 10 to 15 years, it has changed the decision-making process, it has changed the legislation across the world. Environmental Protection Agency, which was a dominant entity in many countries, now they have become very active. Environmental concerns are serious. They are threatening the very existence of human being. So not only this, so we have also considered now ESG in our investment decisions. This increased awareness of environmental concerns has required the investors to consider ESG aspect of investment as well. So investor today is more concerned with the environmental degradation, with the social impacts of business decision making. Not just money alone, these are the factors that must be considered. ESG factors in investment analysis. Environmental factors, conservation, pollution, energy efficiency, reduced emissions, these are considered now in making decisions. The company you are investing in, how socially or environmentally responsible that company is. Social factors, human rights, child labor, welfare concerns of workplace, community impact. These things were not a concern few years ago, but now they are being actively promoted, actively considered. ESG implementation methods. Negative screening means we will not invest in these or these type of companies. We will not invest in those companies that are involved in mining or oil exploration, because these are the companies that are engaged in non-sustainable activities, environmental degradation. So negative screening means excluding certain companies or certain sectors from investments. Positive screening, adding those specific companies that have adopted a certain ESG related framework, or those companies that employ green technologies. Best in class, investing in those companies that have adopted the best ESG considerations. Thematic investing. Thematic investing means to promote specific ESG related goals, such as more sustainable. We will prefer those companies that are involved in more sustainable practices in agriculture, greater use of cleaner energy, green technology, just I told you a little while earlier. Improved management of natural resources like water, or the reduction of harmful gases into the environment like carbon dioxide, carbon emission, etc. So such investment where we select a certain organization based upon a specific economic or social trend called thematic investing. And finally, the impact investing, selecting a targeted organization that has certain environmental objectives along with the measurement of financial returns. We want to make returns as well, but at the same time we want to make sure that the organization is meeting a certain ESG perspective.